promote collaboration between other country schools. For example, send staff or clinical placement students. Sharing resource online. Create sharing manuals. Teacher exchange to build teacher capacity. Online meeting and face-to-face meeting to review objective and effectiveness of the collaboration. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have some very nice suggestions there, building on what Entalo said and BAM said about all sorts of collaboration that could go on within a region, within a country. Thank you very much. Okay. Do we have another presenter that's ready? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harty.
This is a small group of 5 or 6 people who really were at the loose end rather than a group. There were 2 very, very able computer nerds in the group. I think most of our conversation was around about the sharing of teaching material, curriculums, PowerPoints, lesson plans, all of that sort of stuff. Picking up on BAM's presentation about the APOS repository, I think there was a strong feeling from people who have been involved in the APOS repository that perhaps it could be opened up to any school, any school that's interested to contribute and to share material, take that material and use it, modify it, put it back. It's rather a bit like Wikipedia, where it's managed by members and corrected put back to their other members. So we feel that that might be a very worthwhile activity that would come out of this, just to broaden it out and open it out. There's some discussion about the next GEM meeting and how it might be more activity focused. That perhaps we could maybe have longer sessions, something like Deborah had suggested, where she locked the surgeons away for 6 days. There's no real appetite for a 6-day meeting among our group, but a much more focused session whereby a particular activity, like curriculum writing, like lesson planning, like student assessment or whatever, could be put together where rather than just having an introductory lecture about it, we could go much deeper and actually use that. There was some stuff about getting together over the new set of guidelines that Helen and I presented yesterday, mostly Helen, and we felt that perhaps the next GEM meeting should be a review meeting of the draft of the new guidelines, so that we're absolutely clear that everybody agrees on it and feels that they have their input. And then that guideline, once it's agreed, would become a framework for the development of a kind of standard curriculum that then we could hang the repository of teaching material on for its different aspects. So that it gets organised with this sort of central spine of the guidelines, then agreement, then curriculum, then teaching material, then lesson plans, then objectives and so forth, so that the repository could end up being quite a big resource, especially for emerging schools and for schools in less resource countries. In the feedback form, Gordon Ruder said that he's already been sitting here, he's made 3 changes to the way he's going to teach as soon as he goes back to Canada, as a direct result of being here. We think on the feedback survey, somewhere in one of those boxes, we'd like to see everybody comment, how will you change your practice? How will you change your teaching as a direct result of being here? 1 thing or 2 things are out, and anything you think is possible. But making sure that we get that feedback in the working group as to whether or not we've been successful. having the meeting is a success, but making change to how people actually behave in the classroom and in their schools is really a sustainable outcome. There was some discussion about the possibility of turning this into maybe a one-week teacher training seminar, where you could send teachers, schools would pay for it, obviously, but you would hire somebody like Deborah DeRosa or another person, or even very experienced teachers with professional qualifications from within this group actually run a course for younger members of your staff, 2 or 3 from each school, an actual training seminar, which would be self-funding. So that may be a possibility. There may be room for some form of module next time, some group about lobbying, politics, proposal writing, that kind of thing. All schools struggle for resources. There are resource holders, deans in universities, ministers of health, some weird little guy in a ministry office who won't give you money. We all learn how to handle these people almost by accident. And it would be good at a future GEM meeting to be able to share strategies in how we find resources. Standardized terminology, that came up. Perhaps an outcome from GEM would be that a glossary would be developed, or further developed, that could be translated so that we all end up talking about the same thing. The example wanted a number of different fractures named after some obscure surgeon or other that appeared in one of the presentations. But it would be good if we could all be teaching using the same generic material and that might come up. I think that was it. Anything else? Did I miss anything?
The flow of the conference being singular rather than branch.
I'm not quite sure.
We just commented on how lovely it was that we didn't have to choose which presentations to go to, and that the conference was set up with just a singular pathway. It was very nice.
I've just been asked to also point out that we talked about the timeline for the next meeting, that 3 years was probably the most practical in terms of not conflicting with a World Congress and still having people have time to do some work in between, that we wouldn't wait till the next meeting to establish some of the things that we want to work on in the meantime. Oh.
Yes, good evening. I'm Don Bosco Kutuba from Kenya Medical Clinic in Nairobi. And in my group, we didn't have a name and we gave it a name, Pan-African Group at GEM. So I'll have only 2 points, introduction and recommendations. First, introduction. Pan-African Association of P&O Schools and Institutions was formed during the last FATO Congress in Yamoussoukro, Cote d'Ivoire, is a country in West Africa. What was the purpose? The purpose was, or the objective, was to create a platform of exchange and networking among P&O institutions, specifically looking into the curriculum issues, human resource, training materials, and student exchange. Next item is recommendations. This is a recommendation from our group. Take inventory of training schools and resources to establish their status and lay strategies for their improvements. Just a bit.
Sorry.
So that was the first recommendation. Second recommendation, find ways for continuing funding, that is supporting the schools is a big challenge. Lastly, to get governments, especially the national governments, involved in the training schools. How do we get them involved? Such a forum like one we have had today, the GM, should assist in telling the governments the importance of improving the quality of training and hence improve the quality of the services. So we concluded that since this was the first GM meeting, we propose and recommend strongly that GM meetings should continue. Thank you.
Okay, so O'Donnell's coming to join us. Any questions or comments on our Pan-African presentation?
So our group from Pakistan, Japan, Cambodia, India and Sri Lanka. So overall we have 11 points to identify the future of collaboration. So first, ISPO can identify who can be the volunteer from each country to promote the ISPO, including national member society. And second, to establish more working group for in that intended purposes, but need to be more well organized and have proper procedure or structure and flow of the communication. So this one we mentioned that so far the ISPO still have limited working group. So if we can have more working group for helping each other and to strengthen some areas, so we should consider about this. And third point, to support through training and sharing the resource and knowledge and experience. This one, the team request the ISPO to continue this support. Fourth point is faculty development program by ISPO. It refer to the faculty capacity building, for example, training of trainer, and it should be done periodically. For example, every 1 year refresh course or something like that. And then fifth point is to have a working group from different countries to improve the guidelines that can apply for all. Sixth is to enhance exchange faculty from school to school. And seventh, from individuals, institutes have a responsibility to share the expertise for the short course or seminar and so on. So not only depend on ISPO, but each institute have to share the responsibility as well. And share the responsibility to have the organize the seminar or short course and so on. For example, if the short course going to happen in one country, and then those country have to take more responsibilities. And nice to improve the ISPO web platform to be more interactive and more resource sharing. Last close check of ISPO on activity of regional society. So thank you.
A little comment. We had lots of suggestions of what ISPO could be doing and should be doing and might be doing. It would be good to realise We are ISPO. ISPO is not a few people who sit in Brussels. It's all of us. So it's finding people who have enough interest to actually develop the ideas that are coming up today. Thank you, Odom. That's lovely. Do I have another presenter?
Hello, my name is Fredrik Knell. I come from Linköping University in Sweden. Most of the points that our group has written down has already been said, but if to highlight some of the points that we actually have is that we would develop some kind of e-platform to share the information from this GEM meeting and to have a toolbox that could be really useful for all of the educators around the world. We should also compare and share the results from research, and that could be really helpful in funding application, for instance. And we should also have some kind of system to provide schools that can't afford literature with good books to read and having their education. Also the dictionary was mentioned, and it should be connected to the ISO terminology that already exists. One of the things that we talked about was to have a list of all educators, and it could be managed after this meeting, and it could be published on the ISPO page, and not only the recognized educators, but all of them instead. And on the next GEM meeting, it should be the groups could be divided both into generic groups and also into subgroups, where category 1 educators and category 2 educators could have discussions on the same levels. I think that was everything.
I think it's a good opportunity that we educators can work together and cook up some proposal and something for some funding support, and also have a chance to ask for donors to support this kind of activities. And the best arrangement will be just maybe PM post a World Congress. It's easier to save up the money and the accommodation and the flights, this kind of arrangement. Okay, I think the others, all the groups already got inputs. Okay.
So can I just ask for clarification? What I'm understanding is that there's a suggestion to try and have another GEM either right before the next World Congress or right after the next Congress, or the one after that.
During the next ISPO conference, it might be good to have actually a possibility for educators to meet, just to catch up from this year.
It's a follow-up. It's a follow-up of what we've done, in this meeting. It shouldn't be more than like a day long until we have the next big meeting.
All right, you're stealing my thunder. You have to wait till the final closing ceremony, and I'll talk to you.
So that means you're coming up with good ideas. That's perfect. Okay, so we'll leave it to later. Thank you very much for that group. Any comments for that presentation?
Well, actually, I collect some colleagues' comment that if possible, we have our name, contacts that can be shared through use of some platforms that we can keep our communications after the GEM, and before next GEM we can keep communicate rather than just waiting too long. Of course, we need to have the consensus from all the participants to release the contact information.
We don't actually have the full group here, but is there anyone who would have an objection with their contact information, their email in particular, being shared with the group? Right. I've been told to keep quiet again. Hold on.
I know you're such an expert, but would it be worth maybe a group on Facebook? A Facebook group? How would people feel maybe about a Facebook group or a Twitter group?
There's the P&O educators on LinkedIn.
I was just going to suggest, rather than make that decision now, I'm sure we can maybe put an email list out with an actual a request at an individual level, so that they can all just sign that up. That's probably easy to do.
In our group, we were discussing that I think there are 40 schools who have come here, and whether it will be a possibility that each schools maybe have some sort of expertise other than prosthetics, orthotics, and if we can identify or have a database, may not be that way, but if we have some database that what expertise they have, then we can really, we can look at our need, each schools, and then we can network. So I think I would suggest something like that.
So would I be correct that someone from that group would be prepared to develop that database?
I think ISPU has already that 40 schools database. So I think it could be just a simple, some questionnaires or that what expertise you have, which you would like to, because we are talking about sharing the resources. So how do we share the resources? How do we know as a school which schools to approach? And then we are talking about multidisciplinary. So here the members are from the different discipline. So that's what we had discussed. So if I have to do something, I don't mind doing it coordinating.
Thank you, Ritu. Do we have another presenter? Yes?
Ladies.
No, women's group.
I can do it very, very fast, so we can have Brian's. Everything has been said, so, but I want to find out with Ritu, because that was exactly what we had as well. Somewhere where you can go with a question if you're doing something and go to a school who already has done it. I think I have realized that I've been doing a lot of stuff with other schools already have been done, and I would have loved to avoid to repeat and doing my mistakes, because otherwise it's a waste of time and resources. So somewhere, it's been mentioned again, platform where we can post questions, but also somewhere a database where we can see where can I go for maybe looking at special strengths and so on. So I'm done.
So I think we're starting to develop a group here who have a specific interest to try and get this information together, and that's really the sort of thing that we would love to have. Rosie, can we have it in English?
Actually, it's going to be in English because the Latin American Spanish-speaking team, we opened the doors for visitors from Bangladesh, Switzerland, and Germany. Then we have, how do we move forward with GEM in Latin America? And the answer is establishing a similar model as APOS in the Latin American region with the purpose of strengthening the educational programs. It's mean, congratulations to the Asian group, it's a pretty good model. In general, for the next meeting, breaks out session, request to each school to present a teaching project, as mentioned, who wants to be a millionaire, probably everybody. The rocket scale that was mentioned too is another pretty good idea. The J breakout sessions were mainly addressed to educators, not other professionals involved in OMP school. Consider it for the next GEM. For the next GEM meetings, consider the utilization of live streaming for those that cannot attend. Promote the ISPO evaluators, examiners' participation. Important of the continuity, follow-up communication with GEM participants and other not yet involved. We also discussed a few other suggestions. Possibility of establishing a quality management system to strengthen the ISPO image worldwide. Facilitate the evaluation process, focus on institutional, not directly to a graduate. Guidance with possible solutions on recommendations given to educational institutions considering available resources. Develop a profile for the ISPO evaluators, examiners, considering the local and/or regional reality. More consideration to the importance of the translation of documentation, more considerations to the national educational systems and regulation in specific regions. This is what this group proposed.
Thank you very much. Very, very clear guidelines there for us. Have we still got some groups to present? I think we must have. Yes? Do we have another presentation?
I'm from the women's coven that was over in the corner. Oh great. It's rushing over with her. Most of what has been already suggested, we also came up with. I guess the thing that was also really important was the idea that just because you're a new program doesn't mean you don't have really good ideas. And in my experience, and I'll admit right up front here, I don't actually have a P&O course at this point. But in my experience across a number of disciplines, the people who actually are the most creative are the people who are new on the block, because they've got to think laterally, and they're not necessarily reliant on the latest toy or technology, etc. So I think that we need to encourage those presentations of those ideas and acknowledge that expertise sits everywhere, not just in a few locations. We also discussed the idea that, in fact, collaboration models, traditional models, are incredibly resource expensive. They're financially drained. We've got a number of models that are being presented here, but the sources are about to dry up. So what do we do now? So we need to be clever and creative about using technologies that we have that enable international collaboration without necessarily putting people on planes. And so thinking about the sorts of methodologies that we could be using there. And also thinking about resources that have double value. So for example, the idea of using external examiners for your students also then means if somebody is visiting as an external examiner, that they could also do some presentations on some other things, or they could be involved in curriculum development. So trying to value add as much as possible whenever you spend money, to actually value add as much as you can. And we also support the idea of using the current ISPO platforms as much as possible, noting Mary's comment that in fact somebody has to do it. But if you've got existing platforms, to use them. And carrying that idea a little bit further, it was also suggested that a meeting like this, and can I just say, one of the very first things that I said in a dinner with Eddie and a group on Tuesday night was that I was absolutely just blown away by the fact that this is a meeting in this discipline about the education of the discipline. And I know I've said it several times, but I've got the microphone now so I can say it to everybody. This is incredible. And the bottom line is our students actually bring the money in for our courses. And we know research is important, we know, institutions drive it, but the bottom line is our students bring in our money, and if we don't have satisfied students, then we don't have money to fund our faculty. So this is a fantastic meeting, absolutely fantastic, and you're to be congratulated for that. So we'd also like to support the suggestion in terms of making it easier for people to collaborate, of hanging the meeting off the already existing international congresses that are held annually or every couple of years. It means people are already there. there's no extra travel involved, and that's a model that's used in other disciplines as well. Covered? Yeah, I think what we're saying is that we also, two things, the interdisciplinary teams, to engage them in the educational discussions that, and I think that was suggested elsewhere as well. And the other thing that they bring is sometimes fresh ideas about how to do things. And because, you know, in my experience in a particular discipline, you get a pattern of thinking, and it's nothing like having a different, you know, for the same subject, the same pieces of information, different disciplines bring different eyes and different ways of doing things. In terms of coordination of regional effort, we had an interesting discussion about what was a region, which was quite fascinating. Because, for example, in Australia, there's a single course at the moment, so that'll be a very short conversation. So, what is a region? And there are some already existing collaborations with the ASEAN nations, with FATO between Tanzania and Togo. So, it's an interesting conversation as to what you mean by a region and to what benefit. But we did note that there are some countries that have several programs in the same country, and therefore there's probably a very good reason why that particular group would get together. And the other thing is to just point out is that we've been talking a lot of here at this meeting about international One World standards. And that's the other thing I'd just like to say as a member who's not a person who's not a member of this discipline. Please keep that up. You know, One World, you've got an extraordinarily unique opportunity here. Don't lose it. And it truly will be to your strength. Because others will look at it and sort of go, how did you do that? So don't lose it. Thank you.